I'm afraid the accident affects the husband's eyes and he may be permanent blindness.
I can't wait to see you again. I can't wait to see you again.
Dearest, I'd like you to meet my new business partner.
It is wonderful to finally meet you. Likewise. I look forward to working together.
The accident happened on a Tuesday. Chase Adler had been driving back from a late meeting in the West Loop, his mind still running through acquisition numbers from the Riverside development pitch, when a driver blew a red light at the intersection of Michigan Avenue and Wacker Drive and hit his SUV at 40 miles an hour on the driver's side. The impact was total and instantaneous, the kind that doesn't build, doesn't give you a second to brace, just arrives. The airbags deployed. The windshield spiderwebbed into 1,000 precise fractures. The world went white and then, with a completeness that was almost peaceful, went dark entirely. For 72 hours after that, dark was all there was. Not a soft dark. Not the comfortable dark of a room with the lights off. This was the dark of a world that had stopped producing light, a thick, complete absence that pressed against his eyes no matter how wide he tried to open them. He lay in the private room on the 14th floor of Northwestern Memorial and learned, in those 3 days, something he had never understood before about what sighted people take for granted. Not the seeing itself. The orientation. The constant unconscious knowledge of where you are in space, how far the walls are, which direction the door stands. Without vision, the room he lay in could have been any size. Could have been any shape. He existed in it without edges, without bearings, floating in the specific helplessness of a man whose body had been returned to him, but whose primary sense had not. He was admitted with a severe concussion and what the attending neurologist, Dr. Patricia Howe, described as traumatic optic neuropathy, a compression and disruption of the optic nerves severe enough to shut down visual processing completely. The prognosis, she told him carefully on the second day, was genuinely uncertain. In some cases, the swelling subsided and function returned. In others, the damage was permanent. She was honest with him in the particular way that good doctors are honest, not sparing him, but framing the uncertainty with enough precision that he could hold it without being crushed by it. Chase lay in the bed and listened to his world operate around him. He heard everything more clearly than he had ever heard anything. The specific rhythm of the nurse's footsteps in the hallway. He could tell the difference between 4 of them within the first 24 hours. The sound of the elevator doors opening and closing at irregular intervals throughout the day. The distant traffic sounds that rose and fell with the patterns of the city 14 floors below. And Veronica's voice. Veronica Hale, his fiancée of 8 months, a woman he had met at a charity auction in River North and fallen for with a speed and completeness that had surprised even him, a man who had spent his adult life being careful about most things. She was there every day. She arrived in the mornings with coffee and the specific scent of her perfume, a French thing, expensive, that he had always associated with the back of her neck when she leaned close to him. She sat in the chair beside his bed and held his hand and spoke to him in the low, reassuring register of someone who has decided to be steady for another person. She handled the calls from his office, redirecting his assistant with the confidence of someone who had been doing it for years. She organized the flowers that arrived from business associates and informed each sender, individually, of his condition with just enough detail to seem appropriately informed without crossing into the territory of disclosure. She performed, to anyone watching, the role of the devoted partner with a precision that Chase, lying in his bed listening, could only admire. He had no reason to doubt her. He had nothing but the darkness and her voice and the warmth of her hand on his arm, and in those conditions, a person tends toward belief rather than suspicion. He believed her. He loved her. He lay in the bed and was grateful she was there. On the 4th morning, before visiting hours began, Dr. Howe came alone. It was early, 6:15, by the sound of the hospital beginning its morning routines, the shift change conversations audible at the nurse's station down the hall. Dr. Howe entered quietly, pulling the door closed behind her, and began the examination without preamble. She moved through the neurological checklist with practiced efficiency, reflex responses, pupil dilation, tracking tests, pressure sensitivity along the orbital ridge. And Chase knew before she said anything. He had been aware of it for hours, since somewhere around 4 in the morning. A slow, and then suddenly complete resolution, like a lens being adjusted. The dark resolving into shapes, the shapes acquiring edges, the edges acquiring color and depth. He could see the ceiling tiles above him. He could see the 4-line running from his arm to the bag on the stand. He could see, when he turned his head carefully, the gray light of the pre-dawn city pressing through the window blinds. His vision was not just partially restored. It was fully, completely, perfectly restored. He could read the small print on the equipment attached to the wall monitor from across the room. Dr. Howe confirmed it with barely contained professional delight. The swelling had subsided faster than any reasonable timeline she could have projected. The optic nerves had recovered without residual damage. It was rare, she said. Genuinely rare. She had seen 2 comparable recoveries in 20 years of practice. She was prepared to note the restoration in his chart and inform his family. Chase said, "Don't." The word came out before the thought behind it was fully formed. It came from the same place that all his best decisions had come from, over 20 years of building something from nothing, not from analysis, not from calculation, but from the instinct that lived below both of those things and was almost never wrong. The instinct that said, "Wait. Something is wrong, and you do not yet know the full shape of it." Dr. Howe looked at him. In the early light, he could see her face clearly, the slight furrow of professional concern, the careful assessment of a woman trying to determine whether her patient was in shock, was confused, was perhaps not fully oriented. He held her gaze steadily and said, "I need 48 hours. I need you to deliver the prognosis, as though nothing has changed, as though the blindness is permanent. I will explain everything after. But right now I am asking you to trust me that this is necessary." She studied him for a long moment. The silence between them had weight. Then she closed her chart, capped her pen, and said, 48 hours. After that we discuss this again." He thanked her. She left. He lay alone in the room for the 40 minutes before visiting hours, looking at the ceiling he had not been able to see for 3 days, and he thought about why his instincts had fired so hard and so fast. What was it? What had registered below his conscious awareness and sent up a signal strong enough to make him stop a doctor from delivering good news? He did not have an answer yet. But he had learned, over a lifetime of making decisions that other people second-guessed and then watched pay off, that the absence of a reason was not the same as the absence of a cause. At 10 that morning, Veronica arrived with coffee and a concern she wore the way she wore everything, completely, beautifully, without visible seams. Dr. Howe came in 12 minutes later. She stood at the foot of the bed, her voice measured and compassionate, and she told Veronica what she had agreed to tell her. Permanent blindness. Significant lifestyle adjustments required. Continued monitoring, but the prognosis at this stage was definitive. She answered Veronica's questions carefully, maintained the fiction with the steadiness of a woman who had decided to trust her patient, and left. Chase lay still with his eyes closed the entire time. And beneath his closed lids, with the new and complete vision that Dr. Howe had confirmed at 6:15 that morning, he watched Veronica's face. He had positioned himself carefully. Through the thin gap of his eyelashes, the eyelids not fully sealed, just resting, he could see her in the peripheral range of his vision. Not clearly, but clearly enough. He saw it. It lasted less than a second. A movement at the corner of her mouth, upward, involuntary, the specific motion of a person receiving news they had been waiting for. She caught it almost immediately, reassembled her expression into something sorrowful, pressed her fingers to her lips in a gesture of distress that read, to any observer, as a woman struggling to absorb devastating information about the man she loved. But between the moment the doctor said the word permanent and the moment she raised those fingers to her lips, there had been a smile. Small, private, completely involuntary, and absolutely damning. Chase felt the floor of something shift beneath him. He lay perfectly still. He kept his breathing even, and his hands relaxed on the bed. He did not allow a single muscle in his face to respond to what he had just seen. He had spent 20 years in rooms with people who were trying to conceal things: investors, competitors, contractors, attorneys, and he had learned that the most important skill in those rooms was not the ability to see through people. It was the ability to not let them know you had. After Dr. Howe left, Veronica sat quietly for several minutes. She held Chase's hand. She spoke softly. "I'm here. We'll figure this out. I'm not going anywhere." He listened to her voice with the new attentiveness of a man who is no longer listening to what someone is saying but to how they're saying it. The words were right. The cadence was wrong. There was something underneath the softness that he was only now equipped to hear. Something that was not grief, not fear, not the specific anguish of a person watching the future reshape itself into something harder. Something else. Something quiet and anticipatory. Her phone buzzed. "Baby, I need to take this. My mother."
"I'll be right outside."
She moved to the door. He tracked her through the small window, visible through his barely open lids, angled just enough, and watched her step into the hallway and turn her back to the room. And then he saw the second thing. The transformation was not subtle. Her whole posture changed. The careful, composed concern simply fell away, replaced by something unlocked and easy. She was talking to someone and she was animated, her free hand moving in gestures, her head tilting with the physical expression of laughter. Real laughter. Not the performed warmth she deployed in his room, but something genuine and uncomplicated. The laughter of a person who has just received very good news. She was in the hallway for 4 minutes. When she came back in, the mask was back. "That was my mother."
"She's so worried about you. About us."
"I'm sorry for putting you through this," Chase said. His voice was exactly what it needed to be.
Soft.
Slightly broken. The voice of a man who cannot see and is afraid. She found his hand in the dark she believed he still inhabited and squeezed it. "We'll get through this together. For better or worse." They hadn't even married yet. She was already practicing the vows. That evening, Marcus Webb arrived. Chase's childhood friend and CFO was one of a small number of people cleared for access past the private security he maintained even in a hospital. They had grown up 3 blocks apart in South Shore, had attended the same elementary school, had found their way separately into business, and then, 15 years later, back toward each other. Marcus was the person Chase trusted most in the world, not because he was the most capable, though he was formidably capable, but because in 20 years of friendship Chase had never once caught him performing. What Marcus showed on the outside was what was actually happening on the inside. In a life that had increasingly filled with people who showed Chase what they wanted him to see, that quality had become the most valuable thing he knew. Veronica greeted Marcus warmly when he arrived, played the gracious, exhausted hostess for exactly 12 minutes, and then announced she needed to go home to change and shower. She kissed Chase's forehead with the tenderness of someone who has practiced it, told Marcus not to stay too long, and left. The door clicked shut. Chase opened his eyes fully. Marcus, in the process of lowering himself into the bedside chair, froze. He stared at his friend with the specific expression of a person encountering something their brain is processing as impossible. His mouth opened. Nothing came out.
"I can see," Chase said. "I've been able to see since this morning."
"I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you to not react visibly to anything I say, because we are in a hospital and the walls are thin, and Veronica may come back."
"Can you do that?"
Marcus closed his mouth, breathed, nodded. Chase told him everything. He told it in order and with precision. The vision returning at 4 a.m, the conversation with Dr. Howe, the decision to maintain the fiction, the smile he had seen when the doctor delivered the false prognosis, the laugh in the hallway. He described each thing without embellishment or emotional editorializing.
He was reporting facts.
The emotion was there. He could feel it pressed against the inside of his chest like something waiting for a room, but this was not the moment for it. Marcus listened through the whole account without interrupting. His expression moved through shock, then a careful, controlled anger, then something quieter and more purposeful than anger, the look of a man sorting through what he had been given and already beginning to think about what it meant. When Chase finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I never trusted her. I know. From the beginning, Chase. The way she pursued you at that auction. She came at you, not the other way around. The way she always steered conversation toward the business. The portfolio, the property holdings, which deals were performing. I told myself I was being protective. Paranoid. I didn't want to be the friend who couldn't let you be happy. You weren't wrong to say nothing, Chase said. I wouldn't have believed you. That's what she was counting on. The silence between them had the specific quality of two men who have known each other long enough to be honest about hard things without it costing the friendship. What do I need to do? Marcus said. I need everything, Chase said. I need to know who she really is. I need to know who else is involved, because a woman who can smile at a man's blindness while holding his hand did not develop that capacity overnight and is not working alone. I need to know what she's planning in full, not just the shape of it. And I need evidence that is so complete and so irrefutable that when I use it, there is no exit for anyone involved. You want to keep pretending. I want to keep pretending until I have everything. Marcus leaned forward.
Chase.
If she's planning to take advantage of your supposed blindness, and she clearly is, what happens when she has what she wants? What does she need you for after that? The question sat between them. Chase had been asking himself the same question since 4 a.m. We need to move carefully, he said. But we also need to move. Marcus nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small notepad. Old habit. The man had been keeping handwritten notes since college, and uncapped a pen. Tell me where you want to start. They spent the next 90 minutes building the outline of a plan. Marcus would maintain the fiction publicly, act as Chase's guide and designated helper, and use the access that role gave him to begin investigating Veronica's background, finances, and associations. Chase would perform his blindness with the thoroughness of a professional, building the habits and limitations of a man whose world had contracted, while using his recovered vision to document everything that happened inside that contracted world. They would communicate through encrypted messages. They would assume that Veronica was watching everything they could watch, and plan accordingly. This is going to hurt, Marcus said quietly before he left. Seeing it every day, watching her, and not being able to react. Chase thought about the smile, about the laugh in the hallway, about the ease with which she had reassembled her expression when she came back into the room.
I have to see how far she'll go, he said.
I have to understand what I almost married. You already know what she is, Marcus said. You saw it today.
No.
Chase shook his head slowly. I know she's not who I thought she was, but I need to see the full shape of who she actually is. I need to know everyone involved. I need to see every piece of the plan. Because if I act on what I have now, she walks. She denies.
She cries.
She hires an attorney, and I have one smile that I can't prove to anyone. I need the whole architecture. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, capped his pen, put the notepad back in his pocket. Whatever you need. You know that. Chase lay awake long after Marcus left. Veronica had returned by 9, settled back into the chair beside his bed with a book she occasionally turned pages in, and fallen asleep sometime before 11. Her breathing slowed and deepened. Her hand slid off his arm. He lay still beside the warmth of her and stared at the ceiling he could now see clearly, and allowed himself to feel, in the privacy of the dark, what the performance of the day had not left room for. Not rage. Not yet. Something older and deeper than rage.
Grief.
The specific grief of a person who has loved something that was never real, who invested completely in a construction that was designed from the first moment to collapse at a moment chosen by someone else. He had given her 8 months of himself. He had introduced her to his mother. He had looked at her across a dinner table in Napa and thought, with a certainty he had felt about almost nothing else, that this was the person he wanted to build the next chapter with. And she had been sitting across that table calculating. He closed his eyes. Not because he couldn't see, but because sometimes the truth, once seen, required a moment before you could decide what to do with it. Tomorrow, the performance would begin in earnest. The penthouse felt different now. Not physically. It was the same space he had occupied for 6 years, the same views of Lake Michigan that had made him choose it over every other property his broker had shown him, the same furniture he had selected on a long weekend in Milan 3 years ago, the same collection of contemporary American art that covered the walls in a sequence he had curated himself, piece by piece. Over a decade of deliberate accumulation. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. But Chase Adler stood in the center of his living room with his hand on Marcus's arm and looked at everything he had built through the dark lenses of the Cartier glasses he now wore every waking moment, and the familiar space had the quality of a stage set scene from backstage. All the same elements, but with the illusion stripped away, and what remained was mechanics. "Careful, baby," Veronica said, appearing at his side with the quick solicitude she had been deploying since the hospital. She put a hand on his elbow, light and guiding. "The furniture is where it always was, but we should probably rearrange things. Make it easier for you to navigate." "No," Chase said. Then, catching himself, softening. "No, I need to learn to adapt." Dr. House said maintaining familiar surroundings helps with adjustment. Changing everything would reset the learning curve. Behind the dark lenses, he watched Veronica exchange a brief glance with a woman standing near the kitchen doorway. A woman named Sandra, whom Veronica had introduced as a professional caretaker specializing in supporting the visually impaired, highly recommended, available immediately. She was in her late 30s, quiet, efficient, with the practiced neutrality of someone who had spent years in service roles. Marcus's first round of research, delivered via encrypted message at midnight, had revealed that Sandra's professional credentials were real, but her relationship to Veronica was not professional at all. They had grown up in the same household in Naperville. Sandra was Veronica's first cousin, installed in Chase's home in the role of caretaker with the specific purpose of monitoring him and reporting back. "Of course," Veronica said, withdrawing her hand. "Whatever you think is best. I just want you to be comfortable." The first week was an education in the architecture of deception, his own construction as much as hers. Chase had to learn to be blind in the space he knew perfectly. He had to recalibrate every automatic motion, the hand that reached for his coffee without looking, the eye that found the television remote on the side table without conscious effort, the body's entire library of spatial habits built over 6 years of living in these rooms. He had to override all of it and replace it with the deliberate, searching, slightly effortful movements of someone navigating by memory and touch. He bumped into the coffee table on the second morning, a performance he had rehearsed 3 times in the bedroom before executing it. He reached for the kitchen counter and missed by 4 inches, his hand landing on empty air in a way that sent a mug sliding off the edge. He asked Sandra to read him the time when his phone was face up and visible in front of him. Each performance required calculation and effort, and the effort compounded over hours into something exhausting that he had not expected. Acting was work. Sustained acting, maintaining a fiction through every small moment of an ordinary day, with 2 people in the apartment watching him for signs of inconsistency, was the hardest work he had done since the early years of the business, when he had been simultaneously managing construction crews, pitching investors, and running the accounting himself out of a one-room office on the South Side. But watching Veronica was more exhausting still, because once Chase knew what he was looking at, he could not stop seeing it. The performance she had been running for 8 months was not fundamentally different from his. It was just older, more practiced, and aimed in the opposite direction. Where he was working to conceal his recovery, she was working to deepen his helplessness. Every day produced new evidence of that effort. On the 3rd day, he had manufactured an afternoon nap. He lay in the bedroom with the door slightly ajar, his breathing slow and regular, his eyes open in the dimness. The bedroom was positioned down the hall from his study, but the hallway between them was visible through the gap in the door. At 2:17, he heard the particular quiet of someone trying to move without being heard, the specific sound of deliberate footsteps, the soft click of a door opening. Through the gap, he watched Veronica cross the hallway and enter the study. He gave her 30 seconds and then carefully, silently, repositioned himself against the wall beside the bedroom door where the angle through the gap gave him a clean line of sight to his desk. He watched her move directly past the surface of the desk, the papers and folders stacked there, the framed photographs, the objects of the visible and harmless life he kept on display, and pull open the lower left drawer. The one he had left unlocked that morning after removing from it anything he did not want photographed and replacing it with documents that told a version of his portfolio that was accurate enough to be useful and carefully incomplete. She worked with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this before or had at least been very specific in her planning. Each document came out flat, held steady for the phone camera, replaced in exact sequence. Investment portfolios. The LLC structures for his 3 primary holding companies. Property deeds for the commercial properties in the West Loop and the South Loop. The offshore account documentation, real account numbers, accurate balances, all the technical detail a person would need to initiate a transfer if they had the additional authorization they were presumably working to obtain. 19 minutes. She was in his study for 19 minutes. When she finished, she arranged everything as she had found it, not approximately, but precisely, with the attention of someone who understood that the man she believed was blind might have helpers with vision, might have trusted people who would notice discrepancies. She was not careless. She was not working from arrogance, but from preparation. That made her more dangerous, and Chase stood in the dimness of his bedroom and understood more fully why his instincts had told him to wait. 4 minutes later, she appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, her voice warm and solicitous. "Baby, you're awake. I made lunch. Are you hungry?" "Starving," Chase said, and meant it in more ways than she would ever understand. That evening, Marcus arrived for dinner. Veronica played the gracious, tired hostess through 2 courses and a bottle of wine before excusing herself for a bath. The moment her footsteps faded down the hall and the distant sound of running water confirmed she was occupied, Marcus produced his tablet from the bag he carried everywhere now. He spoke in a murmur, his voice barely above the ambient sound of the apartment. "Sandra is Veronica's cousin. First cousin, they grew up in the same house. Their mothers are sisters. Sandra's nursing credentials are legitimate, but she has no record of independent caretaker placements before this one. She was recruited for this specific role." Chase nodded. "What else?" Marcus set the tablet on the coffee table between them and turned it to face his friend. "I found something this week that I want you to be prepared for before you hear it." Chase looked at the screen. Hotel records. The Waldorf Astoria downtown. A series of check-in and check-out timestamps spanning 4 months, all from the same guest account. "Derek Hollis," Marcus said. "She's been meeting Derek Hollis at the Waldorf for 4 months." Chase felt the information land. He had known the name for years. Derek Hollis was a real estate developer who operated across the same commercial corridors Chase did, with the specific aggression of someone who had learned the industry by watching more successful people and decided that the difference between them and him was primarily a matter of access. Chase had beaten him in 2 competitive acquisition bids, the River North mixed-use development and the Fulton Market warehouse conversion. He had assumed, when Hollis's name continued to appear in his professional orbit, that it was the ordinary persistence of a competitor who had not found another target yet. He understood now that the persistence had never been professional. "How far back does their relationship go?" he asked. "At least a year," Marcus said. "Possibly longer. There are communication records suggesting contact before she met you." Before she met him. Chase turned that over. Before the auction in River North where she had approached him, he remembered now with the particular clarity of a detail that had always been present but had never been assigned significance, had introduced herself and somehow, in the space of a 40-minute conversation, made him feel as though the decision to see her again was entirely his own. Had she known who he was before she walked across that room? "Did she target you specifically?" he asked. "I don't have confirmation yet," Marcus said. "But the timeline suggests at minimum that Hollis and Veronica were in contact before your engagement. The nature of the planning we're seeing, the conservatorship research, the financial mapping, the infrastructure around this, doesn't materialize in 8 months. This was built over more than a year." Chase was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands on his knees. Large, still hands, the hands of a man who had poured concrete and carried materials and done every physical thing that building something from scratch required before he could afford to pay people to do those things for him. "I want cameras," he said. "Hidden. Professional grade. Every room except the bathrooms." "How soon?" "Team is already sourced." Marcus folded his tablet closed. I've been sourcing them for 3 days.
I was hoping you'd say this.
They can go in Thursday while she's at the salon. She has a standing 4-hour appointment. I'll have Sandra take me to a follow-up appointment. 3 hours, maybe 4. That gives your team enough time. Marcus looked at his friend for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Are you all right?" Chase considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," he said, "but I will be. Right now the most important thing is not to be all right. The most important thing is to be accurate." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we keep going." They sat in silence for a moment, the particular silence of two men who have known each other long enough that the absence of words carries as much as words would. From down the hall, the sound of running water continued. Somewhere in the building, an elevator moved between floors. Outside the windows, Chicago held its shape against the winter dark, indifferent and continuous. Chase stood up, adjusted his posture into the careful, deliberate movement of a man without sight, and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. He moved along the counter by touch, even though he could see every inch of the space perfectly. The performance continued. It would continue until he had everything. If this story already has its hand around your heart, you are in exactly the right place. Follow Echoed Truth Stories, where the stories the world tries to keep quiet finally find their voice.
Subscribe now.
The cameras are about to go up, and what they capture will change everything. On a Wednesday morning 12 days after his discharge from the hospital, Veronica sat down across from Chase at the breakfast table and set her coffee cup down with the careful deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed the opening of a conversation. "I've been thinking," she said. "You need more help than I can give you alone." Chase kept his expression neutral. He was eating toast that he had cut himself, an act of performance that had required him to miss the first cut by half an inch and then overcorrect on the second, a small theater of incompetence that Sandra had observed from the kitchen doorway with the particular watchfulness of someone taking notes. "I have Sandra," Chase said. "And you." "Sandra is a nurse. She's not a specialist." Veronica's voice carried the specific cadence of patience being carefully deployed. "And Chase," her hand covered his on the table, the touch practiced and warm. "I need to be honest with you. I'm exhausted. I am trying so hard to be everything you need, and I am falling short, and it's scaring me. We need professional support. Someone who specializes in this. In supporting people who are adjusting to significant vision loss." Chase let a silence sit. He did not fill it immediately, which was what she was expecting. He let her sit with the silence the way a person who is genuinely processing difficult information would sit with it. "What kind of specialist?" he asked. "A caretaker. A coordinator. Someone who can handle the daily management, so I can focus on being your partner and not your nurse. Do you have someone in mind?" Actually, she reached for her coffee cup, a small tell he had learned to read, the slight over-precision of the gesture that appeared when she was managing her own composure. "Yes, I do. A man named Derek. Derek Hollis. I've known him for years. He has experience working with visually impaired adults. He comes very highly recommended, and he's available to start as soon as this week." The coffee cup. Chase had been holding his own cup midway to his lips. He set it down without completing the motion, a deliberate movement that landed harder than he intended, the ceramic ringing against the saucer, a small spray of coffee across the white tablecloth. He made a show of flinching, pulling his hands back, the performance of a startled blind man that served, in this moment, as perfect cover for what was actually happening inside his chest. He was not startled. He was not surprised. He had known, since Marcus showed him the hotel records, that Hollis would eventually surface inside his life in some capacity. That was the nature of the plan Veronica was running. She needed Hollis proximate. She needed him inside the walls. But knowing intellectually that it was coming and sitting across a breakfast table from the woman you had almost married while she calmly proposed bringing her lover into your home as your caretaker were two entirely different experiences. The audacity of it pressed against the inside of his skull like pressure. "Oh, baby." Veronica was up immediately, dabbing at the spilled coffee with a napkin.
"I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have sprung this on you. This is exactly why we need help, these little accidents." "It's fine," Chase said. His voice was carefully level. I'm fine. I just a specialist. In the apartment. It feels like a lot. I know. She sat back down, set the napkin aside, looked at him with the expression of compassion she deployed the way other people deployed weather, consistently, covering everything. But Chase, you have to let people help you. You have to stop trying to manage this alone. You're not alone anymore. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He let her talk. He listened to every word, and underneath every word, he listened to the other thing. The frequency she could not control, the quiet vibration of anticipation that had been there since the hospital. This was not the voice of an exhausted woman trying to help someone she loved. This was the voice of a woman who had just made the move she had been planning for a significant number of weeks, and was waiting to see if it landed. All right, he said finally. A trial period. Her relief was visible and immediate, too visible, too immediate, the relief of a person who had been worried about a specific obstacle and has just learned the obstacle has been removed. Thank you, she said. You won't regret this. He already did, but not for the reason she imagined. Derek Hollis arrived that afternoon. Chase sat in the living room in his regular position, the armchair angled toward the window, the large print book open in his lap that he could read from across the room without anyone knowing he was reading it, and listened to Veronica greet him at the door. Her voice in that greeting was the clearest tell he had heard yet. She was not greeting a professional. She was greeting a co-conspirator she had not been alone within 3 weeks, and the warmth that came through was not the warmth she used with strangers or with professional contacts. It was the warmth of intimacy, familiar and slightly suppressed, the specific register of two people who know each other in ways they are currently pretending not to. She led him into the living room and made the introduction with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed it. Chase, this is Derek Hollis. Derek, my fiancé, Chase Adler. Chase stood and extended his hand, deliberately aimed 6 inches to the left of where Derek actually stood. Derek corrected for it, stepping slightly to intercept the handshake, and the grip he offered was the grip of a man who uses physical contact as a communication medium. Firm. Slightly prolonged. The grip of someone establishing parameters. Mr. Adler, Derek said. I'm here to make your life easier. I'm managing, Chase said. I'm sure you are. But there's no shame in accepting support. His tone was smooth and slightly elevated, the particular register of condescension that operates just below the level where the target can comfortably object to it. The tone of someone speaking to a person they have already categorized as beneath them, while maintaining the surface vocabulary of helpfulness. Veronica tells me you've been struggling with the adjustment. I have good days and less good days, Chase said. That's completely normal. Would you tell me about your daily routine? What are the biggest challenges you're encountering? Chase answered the questions that followed with the careful vagueness of someone whose world had contracted to the dimensions of the penthouse. He described the difficulties that Sandra had been observing and reporting, the spatial disorientation, the adjustment to the kitchen layout, the challenge of managing his phone. He was precise enough to be convincing and general enough to give nothing away that could be verified later. All the while, through the dark lenses of his glasses, he watched Derek move through the room. Not with the attentiveness of a caretaker assessing a space for practical modifications. With the attentiveness of a man doing inventory. His eyes moved across the art on the walls, the value of which Chase knew he recognized because Hollis operated in the same high-end Chicago development world and understood what that kind of collection cost. His eyes moved across the view from the windows, the quality of the furniture, the built-in bar cabinet along the north wall. He was pricing the room. He was standing in the middle of what he expected to own, and he was assessing the asset. For an hour, Derek performed the role of thoughtful professional caretaker with a competence Chase found genuinely irritating. He made practical suggestions. He proposed small modifications to the kitchen setup. He offered to research adaptive technology. Veronica watched from the couch with a soft satisfaction of someone watching a plan execute, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving between Derek and Chase with the quiet pleasure of a chess player whose pieces are in position. That evening, after Derek had left with confident promises to return the following morning, Chase sat in his study and waited for the sound he had been waiting for since the installation of the surveillance equipment the previous Thursday. The ventilation shaft. The building was a converted 1920s office tower, its bones intact under the renovations, original ductwork running between floors and patterns that reflected the building's original function rather than the residential privacy requirements of its current occupants. Chase had discovered the acoustic properties of the shaft that ran between his study and the bedroom directly above it on his second week in the penthouse, years ago, a quirk he had noted and filed away without ever imagining the particular use to which he would eventually put it. Veronica's bedroom was directly above the study. He heard her voice at 9:47, muffled but intelligible through the metal shaft. "Can't believe you actually came here," she said. Her voice carried something he had not heard in it before, a lightness, a brightness, the specific vocal quality of a person who has dropped a weight they carry constantly and forgotten for a moment that it exists. "This is the first time in 3 weeks I've felt like myself." Derek's response was lower, harder to resolve. But Chase caught, it won't be much longer. 2 weeks for the papers, then the hearing. By the time spring gets here. Veronica's laugh, real laughter, the same laughter he had heard in the hospital hallway, floated down through the shaft. "God, I cannot wait. Cape Verde. I want to sit on a beach and not think about any of this." "You won't have to." Derek's voice clearer now. "How long until the will situation is handled?" "Right after the wedding. She already has it drafted. He just needs to sign. With power of attorney." Chase stopped writing notes. He had been recording the conversation with his phone, sat on the arm of the chair with the screen dark, and simply listened to the next sentence. "And when the accident happens," Veronica said, her voice dropping slightly, 2 weeks after conservatorship goes through. Long enough for it to seem like a normal part of the adjustment period. Short enough that we're not waiting forever."
She paused.
"The doctors have confirmed the medication interaction is undetectable in standard autopsy screening. I just need him to have been on the blood pressure medication long enough for it to be part of his established regimen." Chase sat very still. He had suspected. Marcus had used the phrase eliminate, and they had both understood what it meant. But hearing it in her voice, specific, planned, already scheduled, described in the language of logistics, was something that moved through him differently than suspicion had. It arrived in the space behind his sternum and settled there with the weight of something permanent. He waited until the voices stopped. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. "They're planning to kill me," he said, his voice low and precise. "Medication overdose. Blood pressure pills. 2 weeks after conservatorship is approved. She has a doctor already. Possibly more than one." Marcus's response, a string of profanity delivered quietly but with evident feeling, lasted several seconds. Then, "How soon do you want to end this?" "Not yet," Chase said. "I want the conservatorship hearing. I want them committing perjury in open court. I want every person she has recruited, the doctors, the attorney, Hollis, all of them exposed simultaneously. I want a net, not a conversation. Brother, get me the name of a criminal defense attorney, the best in Illinois, and start building the evidence package for Detective Reyes. I want it ready to deliver the moment I say go." After he hung up, Chase sat alone in the study for a long time. Outside the windows, Chicago was cold and clear, January having given way to February, the lake dark and flat beyond the lights of the Lakeshore Drive. He looked out at it with the eyes he had not been supposed to have and thought about the particular irony of being more clearly sighted now than he had been at any point in the past 8 months. Not just his physical vision. The other kind. The kind that let you see people for what they actually were rather than what you had decided they were going to be. He had been genuinely, completely blind to Veronica. Not because he was foolish. Not because the signs weren't there. Marcus had seen them, and Marcus was not a more perceptive person than Chase, just a less emotionally invested one. Chase had been blind because he had wanted to see something else. He had been ready, at 40 years old, with everything he had built and everything he had worked for, to stop doing it alone. He had been ready to build something with someone. And Veronica had understood that readiness the way a person who studies locks understands the specific vulnerability of a door that wants to be opened. She had walked through the door he had been leaving open, and he had thanked her for it. He closed his eyes. He had 2 weeks. He would use every hour of them. Veronica raised the subject over Sunday breakfast, in the particular way she had with the things she had already decided, gently, persistently, in the language of desire rather than intention, so that the refusal of them felt not like disagreement, but like the withholding of something she needed. "I've been thinking about the wedding," she said, her voice soft with a longing that Chase now understood had nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with timeline. "I don't want to wait anymore." Chase set down his fork with measured care. "We talked about postponing until I was more adjusted." "You're adjusting beautifully." Her hand moved across the table to cover his, warm, practiced, the touch of someone who has learned to make physical contact function as punctuation. "And I want to take care of you properly, Chase. As your wife. Not just as your fiancée. There's a difference legally and emotionally, and I want that." Behind the dark lenses, Chase studied her face. The conservatorship hearing was 14 days away. A legal marriage, executed before that hearing, would layer spousal rights atop the guardian rights she was seeking, a double enclosure, a parallel architecture of legal claim. If the conservatorship gave her control of his assets and the marriage gave her claim to his estate, the combination would be nearly impenetrable from a financial standpoint, and after the medication accident, it would frame her perfectly as the grieving widow who had made every sacrifice to support her disabled husband in the final weeks of his life. She had designed it carefully.
He would give her that.
"I don't want you to feel obligated," Chase said. His condition, she knew, made him insecure. She would expect him to retreat into that insecurity now. "I'm not obligated. I'm in love." She squeezed his hand.
A small ceremony.
Intimate. Just close friends. 2 weeks from Saturday. The same weekend as the conservatorship hearing. Filed on Friday, ceremony on Saturday, signed will and power of attorney by Monday.
Clean. Fast.
Everything in place.
2 weeks seems fast, he said.
"We've been engaged for 8 months, Chase." She let a note of gentle firmness enter her voice, the teacher who is running out of patience. "We've waited long enough. Unless you're having second thoughts about us." "No second thoughts," Chase said. 2 weeks sounds perfect. That afternoon, with Veronica and Derek both out under cover of wedding planning, Marcus arrived and locked the study door. He laid out what he had found without preamble. The conservatorship attorney filed the petition yesterday. It's in the Cook County court system. The 3 physicians who are scheduled to testify have all been paid. I found the wire transfers from an account in Veronica's name that she has been using exclusively for this operation. The account was opened 14 months ago, 1 month before you met her. Chase absorbed this. Before she walked across the room at that auction, before the conversation, before the first date, before the 8 months, there had been an account, funded and waiting. Veronica had not decided to defraud him after falling for him and then falling out of love. She had identified him, researched him, and constructed a plan to extract his assets before she had ever introduced herself. The entire relationship, from the first moment to this breakfast conversation about a small, intimate wedding, had existed as a vehicle for the plan. He had never been her fiancé. He had been her project. "If you go through with the ceremony," Marcus said carefully, "even with the prenuptial agreement filed in advance, there will be legal challenges. She'll hire people to contest it. It complicates the timeline and the cost of the eventual proceedings." "I know." "Then call it off. We have enough now, the hotel records, the wire transfers, the audio from the kitchen. We can go to Detective Reyes today, and she is arrested by tonight." Chase stood and walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the lake. "If I do that," he said, "I get Veronica. Maybe Hollis." But the 3 doctors walk away. The attorney walks away. The people she recruited to commit perjury in open court walk away because the perjury was never committed. Sandra stays clean because being someone's cousin isn't a crime. And in 6 months, she finds another version of this. A different man. A different plan. A different set of doctors. Marcus said nothing. "I want the hearing to happen," Chase said. "I want her and Hollis and those 3 doctors standing before a judge filing fraudulent medical testimony in an active legal proceeding. I want every piece of this on the court record. And then I want to take my glasses off and watch it end. The wedding is a risk. The wedding is necessary," Chase said. Because at that altar, in front of witnesses, in front of her people, with cameras in that chapel and Detective Reyes outside the door, the exposure will be complete and irrefutable. She doesn't just get arrested. She gets publicly dismantled in the exact moment she thought she had finally won. In the exact location she chose. In the dress she bought with money she was already spending against my accounts. Marcus sat with that for a moment. The prenuptial agreement, Chase continued. I want it drafted tonight and filed with the Cook County clerk before 9 on Saturday morning. Before she wakes up. Before she leaves for the hotel to get ready. Filed, notarized, and recorded. I'll call the attorneys tonight, Marcus said. But Chase, there is one more thing. He pulled up his tablet and turned it toward his friend. The audio recording from the ventilation shaft, transcribed and time-stamped. There is a reference in here to a specific physician. A Dr. Raymond Chu, cardiologist. Marcus paused. He wrote the death certificate for a man named Gerald Pratt 3 years ago. Pratt was a widower, significant estate, died of cardiac arrest 18 months after marrying a woman who, Chase, the woman was using a different name. But the physical description in the private investigator's report I commissioned matches Veronica Hale with specificity. Same height, same build, same approximate age. Different hair, different location. She was operating in Minneapolis. The room was very quiet. Gerald Pratt, Chase said. Was not the first, Marcus said. I'm sorry. Chase stood absolutely still. He looked at the lake. He looked at it for a long time. She had done this before. He was not a target. He was a pattern. He turned back from the window. Then we move on her at the altar. And we give everything, including the Pratt file, to Detective Reyes before the ceremony begins. Marcus closed his tablet. His jaw was set. Tell me what you need. They spent 4 hours in the study, working through every element of the final act. The prenuptial agreement, ironclad, drafted by the best matrimonial attorneys in Illinois, filed with the court before Veronica was awake. The evidence package for Detective Reyes, audio, surveillance footage, wire transfer records, hotel documentation, the connection to Gerald Pratt in Minneapolis. The portable projector that Marcus would set up in the chapel the morning of the ceremony, connected to a tablet with the surveillance footage queued and ready. 2 of Chase's cousins stationed at the side doors. Detective Reyes and her partner in an unmarked vehicle outside. And one more call. Chase picked up his phone and dialed his mother's number. Eleanor Adler answered on the second ring with the expectant alertness of a woman who had been waiting for this call since Marcus had told her, 3 weeks earlier, that her son could see and that something was very wrong. Mama, Chase said, I need you to come to Chicago. I need you to bring everyone, Natalie, the cousins from Evanston, anyone who loves me and can get on a plane or get in a car. I need you at the church. Not at the reception, not after. At the church, an hour before the ceremony starts.
Can you do that?
A pause. Then his mother's voice, steady and utterly certain. We'll be there. He ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. The weight of what was coming pressed against him. Not with dread, but with something more complicated. The end of a performance he had been living inside for 40 days. The end of waking up beside someone he had to watch without reacting to. The end of moving through his own home as a stranger. He should have felt relief. He felt, mostly, a grief so settled it had stopped being acute and had become simply the background condition of his days, like a weather system that had moved in and decided to stay. Over the next 2 weeks, Chase watched the wedding take shape around him like a stage set being assembled by someone who did not know that the director had rewritten the final scene. Veronica was more attentive than she had been in weeks. She touched him constantly, his arm, his shoulder, the back of his hand, the way someone touches an object they are claiming without wanting to appear to claim it. She spoke in endearments. She described the small ceremony she was planning with a warmth that had the specific quality of warmth applied to something that does not actually generate it. He listened to all of it and ate his breakfast and drank his coffee and performed the careful, slightly labored movements of a man who could not see, and at night he lay awake in the dark beside her and listened to her sleep. He thought about Eleanor Adler getting on a plane. He thought about his sister Natalie, who had never liked Veronica and had been too kind to say so plainly. He thought about his cousins from Evanston, who would be in that chapel an hour early and would understand their assignment without requiring it to be explained twice. He thought about what he was going to say. On Thursday morning, at 7:15, Chase sat at a conference table in the offices of a law firm in the Loop and signed the prenuptial agreement. 2 partners witnessed it. The notary stamped it. At 8:51, it was filed electronically with the Cook County Court. By the time Veronica woke up and found him in the kitchen with his coffee and his dark glasses and his careful blind man's movements, the document that would make the wedding she was planning functionally worthless was already in the public record. He handed her a coffee cup and told her she looked beautiful. She smiled with everything she had and said, "Only 2 more days." "Only 2 more days," he agreed. This is the moment the whole story has been building toward, and you do not want to miss it. Follow Echoed Truth Stories right now, and never miss another story that makes you hold your breath. Share this with someone who needs to believe that the truth always finds its moment. Chase woke before dawn on the morning of the wedding. The room was dark in the ordinary way of rooms before sunrise, not the complete depthless dark of his 3 days in the hospital, but a graded dimness, the shapes of furniture and window and ceiling visible in the ambient light of the city that came through the blinds at all hours. He had lain awake for most of the night. Not with anxiety, exactly. He had not felt anxiety in the conventional sense for weeks, the long 40-day performance having burned away the kind of uncertainty that produces anxiety and replaced it with something more like resolution. He lay awake because there was too much to hold in the mind at once, and the mind wanted to hold it all, wanted to turn each element over one more time in the last hours before it became action. Beside him, Veronica slept. She slept with the complete ease of someone whose conscience was not a participant in her life. Her breathing was deep and regular. Her hand rested open on the pillow between them, palm upward, fingers slightly curled, the unconscious gesture of someone reaching for something even in sleep. He looked at her in the dim light, and he thought about the first time he had seen her sleep, in the early months of the relationship, how he had looked at her then with a feeling he had not wanted to name too quickly because he was a careful man who had learned to be suspicious of the things that came too easily and yet had not been suspicious enough. He thought about that version of himself. The man who had looked at her sleeping and felt the particular warmth of someone who believes they have finally found the right place to put something they have been carrying a long time. He did not hate that man. He was not angry at him. He had worked with the information he had. So had Chase. His phone glowed on the nightstand. Marcus. Everything is in place. Projector is set up in the chapel, tested twice, audio and video confirmed. Detective Reyes is briefed and positioned. Evidence package was delivered to her at 6 this morning. Your family landed at O'Hare on the red eye. They're at the Marriott in Lincoln Park. Your mother says to tell you she loves you and to stop worrying about her and focus. Chase typed back. Tell her I can see clearly. She'll know what I mean. He slid out of bed quietly. In the bathroom, with the door closed, he stood in front of the mirror for the first time in 40 days without the dark glasses and looked at himself. His own face, unremarkable in the way of faces you have looked at for 40 years, but present.
Real.
The face of a man who was about to finish something. He put the glasses back on and went to make coffee. The morning moved in the slow, over-detailed way of mornings that will be significant. Every ordinary thing, the coffee, the light through the windows, the city beginning to assemble itself for a Saturday, had the quality of a last occurrence. Not because anything was ending exactly, but because the person he would be after today would be different from the person he had been for the past 40 days, and different again from the person he had been for the 8 months before that, and he understood that whatever came after would require a version of himself that he had not yet fully met. Veronica emerged from the bedroom at 9, wrapped in the specific radiance of a woman who has decided today is a significant day and is lending it her full performance. She was in the hotel by noon, sequestered with her bridesmaids and her stylist, and her carefully curated atmosphere of bridal anticipation. She kissed Chase at the door with a warmth that had in it the particular warmth of endings, the warmth of someone saying goodbye to a version of a relationship that is about to become something else. I love you, she said. I love you too, he said. The moment her car cleared the building, Marcus arrived. And with him, Eleanor Adler, who walked through the door of her son's penthouse for the first time and looked at the views and the furniture and the art with the quiet expression of a woman from South Shore who has raised a son who lives here and is choosing in this moment to focus on her son rather than the address. She crossed the room and took Chase's face in both hands the way she had done when he was 8 years old and had come home from a fight with a bloody lip. He removed his glasses. His mother looked at his eyes, dark and clear and unambiguously functional, and her own eyes filled. Not with relief, exactly. With something older and more complex. Her hand moved to his cheek.
That girl, she said softly.
That calculating, wicked girl. Not for much longer, Chase said. His sister Natalie, 3 years younger and 3 inches shorter, had the same jaw as their mother and used it with the same decisiveness. She looked at Chase, looked at Marcus, and said, "What do we need to do?" "You know your role," Chase said. "Come in, take your seats, look surprised but not too surprised, and if anything happens that you don't expect, look at Marcus and do what he does." The cousins from Evanston, 4 of them, ranging from 26 to 38, filed in with a particular focused energy of people who have been told something is wrong with a family member and have crossed several states to address it. Chase briefed them in 6 sentences. 2 of them stationed themselves, at his direction, near the side doors of the chapel, where they would position themselves casually and early. Detective Sandra Reyes arrived in plain clothes at 1:15, driving a car that was not her personal vehicle. She was 41, composed, with the specific economy of movement of someone who has spent 20 years walking into rooms where something has already gone wrong. She shook Chase's hand and looked at him with the frank assessment of a person evaluating a witness. "You understand that the arrest happens inside the ceremony," she said. "That's a public space with civilian witnesses. My partner and I will enter through the rear doors on my signal. Your job is to get to the moment where the admission has been made, on the projector, on the recording, before we move. Once we move, stay where you are and don't approach any of the subjects."
"Can you do that?"
"Yes," Chase said. She held his gaze for a moment. "I've read the full package your associate delivered this morning. The Minneapolis situation. Gerald Pratt. We've already been in contact with Hennepin County. They're reopening." Chase nodded. "You did the right thing collecting everything," she said. "A lot of people in your position would have confronted her the first week and watched the case fall apart." "I had good people around me," Chase said. At 2:45, the car arrived to take him to the chapel. Chase stood in the penthouse for a moment before leaving. He looked at the view, the lake, the skyline, the particular light of a February afternoon in Chicago, gray and bright at once, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more real than it normally does. He had built the life he was looking at from nothing, from a one-room office and a borrowed truck and an idea about what vacant land in the right location could become, and he had defended it, and it was still here. Still his. He picked up his dark glasses.
He put them on.
He went down to the car. The chapel was a small historic building in Lincoln Park, stone facade, arched windows, the kind of understated permanence that certain Chicago buildings had accumulated simply by surviving everything the city had thrown at them. Veronica had chosen it for reasons she had described as aesthetic: the light through the windows, the simplicity of the interior, the intimacy of the space. Chase understood the actual reasons now. Small, controllable, guest list of 22, no one present who would ask difficult questions. He walked in on Marcus's arm at 2:55. Veronica's 22 were already seated. Chase cataloged them through his dark lenses as he moved down the side aisle to the front. The 3 doctors in the 3rd row on the right, their presence here the most brazen element of the entire operation, seated as wedding guests 24 hours before they were scheduled to testify in the conservatorship hearing. Sandra in the 5th row, her expression appropriately sentimental. Various friends of Veronica's who had been woven over the past 8 months into the architecture of Chase's isolation, people who had been present at dinners and gatherings where his business associates and old friends had somehow not been mentioned, had somehow not been invited. And in the 2nd row, sitting with the comfortable assurance of a man who has arrived in the place he believes he is inheriting, Derek Hollis. His name appeared on the printed program as family friend. He was dressed better than any of the other guests. He held his program with the light grip of a man whose mind is not on the ceremony, but on what the ceremony makes possible. Then the side door opened, and Chase's family came in. The effect on the room was immediate and almost physical. 30 people, his mother and sister first, then the cousins, then his oldest friends from South Shore and from college, faces that Veronica had been systematically removing from his life for 8 months, filled the pews with a presence that changed the room's architecture. Veronica's carefully managed audience of 22 became a minority. Eleanor Adler walked without hesitation to the second row and looked at Derek Hollis with an expression that required no translation. He moved without speaking, 3 rows back, and did not look up for the remainder of the pre-ceremony period. At 3 o'clock, the doors at the back of the chapel opened. Veronica appeared in the light. She was extraordinary. The dress was architectural, precise, the kind of white that existed in a different category from the white of other white things, a white that had been engineered rather than chosen. She moved down the aisle with the measured grace of someone who had practiced every element of this moment, and she was perfect, and she had never in 8 months been anything other than what she was now, a performance of such skill and completeness that the performance was all there was. She saw the family. He watched her see it. A fractional hesitation at the midpoint of the aisle, a recalibration so fast that most observers would have missed it, and then the recovery, the smile steady, the pace unchanged, the presentation intact. Always a performer. Always in control, until the precise moment she wasn't. She reached the altar. She took her place across from him. Up close, in the light of the chapel's windows, Chase could see the triumph she was managing behind the appropriate expression of a bride on her wedding day. She believed she was one signature away from everything she had planned for across 14 months of preparation. She believed the blind man standing across from her holding his small bouquet was unaware of every move she had made since the hospital. The priest began. Chase let him move through the opening remarks, the welcome, the reading from Corinthians that Veronica had selected. Love bears all things, believes all things, with a patience that was not difficult because it was not uncertain. He knew exactly what was coming. He was simply giving her the last full minute of believing she had won. If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Chase reached up and removed his dark glasses. The chapel held its breath. Veronica's face. He would remember this for the rest of his life, not with satisfaction, not with pleasure, but with the particular clarity of something witnessed that cannot be unwitnessed. Veronica's face moved through 3 distinct states in less than 2 seconds. The first was incomprehension. The second was recognition. The third was the specific expression of a person watching the structure they have built with great care begin to come apart, a thing they understand is happening even before they have processed what it means. "I do," Chase said. His voice carried clearly through the chapel to the back row. "I have a reason why these two should not be wed."
Several, in fact.
Veronica, her voice had thinned to something barely recognizable as her voice. "Your eyes. You can see."
Yes.
He looked at her directly. "I can see. I have been able to see since the morning after the accident, since 4 a.m. on the day you sat beside my hospital bed and smiled when the doctor told you the blindness was permanent. I can see you perfectly, Veronica. I have been able to for 40 days. And in those 40 days, I have seen everything." He turned to face the chapel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you who I have been sharing my life with." He nodded to Marcus, at the side of the altar. The projector lit up the white wall of the chapel. The footage was clear and well-lit and required no narration. Veronica at his desk, documents spread before her, photographing each one with focused precision. Veronica and Derek in the living room, wine in hand, discussing offshore transfers with the specific vocabulary of people who have been planning this for a long time. The audio from the kitchen ventilation, her voice filling the chapel, describing the medication protocol, the timing, the 2 weeks after conservatorship, the doctor, who had confirmed the interaction was undetectable. The room came apart. Not in the dramatic way of film, not all at once with shouting and movement. It came apart in the way of real things coming apart, in stages, people turning to each other first in confusion, and then in dawning understanding, voices rising in fragments, chair scraping. Sandra made a movement toward the door and found Chase's cousin already standing there, arms folded. Derek was on his feet. The two cousins at the side exit stepped forward without being asked. Veronica stood at the altar and watched her own voice play through the chapel's acoustics and said nothing for a long time. Her face had completed its progression through the three states and settled into something Chase had not seen before. Not the mask, not the performance, but the face beneath both, unguarded and stripped and finally, for the first time in 8 months, real. It was not a kind face. It was not a soft face. It was a face that had made decisions he had not known it was capable of making. "You recorded us," she said quietly. "Every room. Every conversation." He stepped closer and she stepped back and the altar rail caught her at the back of the knees. "I want you to understand something, Veronica. Not for the record. Not for the charges. For yourself. I know about Gerald Pratt." The color left her face completely. "I know about Minneapolis. I know this is not the first time. I know this was planned before you walked across the room at that auction. I know my name was in your phone before you introduced yourself to me." He paused. "I know that everything you gave me, every dinner, every morning, every time you said you loved me, was a performance. And I want you to know that I loved you. The version of you I thought was real. I loved that person completely and without reservation. And that person didn't exist. And somehow that is the thing that I am going to carry the longest." Veronica said nothing. The back doors of the chapel opened. Detective Reyes walked up the center aisle with her badge visible, her partner beside her, their footsteps unhurried and precise. She stopped at the altar and looked at Veronica Hale with the expression of someone who has heard the recordings and read the files and is not, in any respect, surprised by what she is looking at. "Veronica Hale, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, forgery of financial documents, and conspiracy to commit perjury. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs went on at the altar. As they walked her down the aisle, Veronica turned back once. Her eyes found his across the chapel. The mask was gone. The performance was gone. What was left was something unresolved and possibly, somewhere underneath everything, almost human. "You think you're better than me," she said. "No," Chase said. "I think I built what I have. And I think you tried to take it. And I think the difference between those two things is the only thing that matters." They let her out. Derek Hollis was arrested at the side exit, his confident posture evaporated, replaced by the specific diminishment of a man confronting consequences he had not actually believed in. The three doctors were taken into custody in the parking lot. The attorney who had prepared the fraudulent conservatorship documents had been in custody since 8 that morning. Sandra, understanding with the instinct of someone who has observed the situation arrive at its conclusion, offered no resistance. When the police were gone, the chapel was quiet. Chase stood alone at the altar in his wedding suit, the suit he had chosen himself, that Marcus had delivered to the penthouse that morning, that he had put on for a ceremony that was never going to be what Veronica had planned it to be. Around him, his family and his friends sat in the pews in the specific stillness of people who have witnessed something they're going to be processing for a long time. His mother came first. She came up the aisle with the measured walk of a 70-year-old woman who has seen too many things to hurry toward any of them, and she put her arms around her son and held him the way she had held him through every hard thing. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did he. When she stepped back, she looked at his face in the way she had always looked at his face, the particular maternal reading of a person looking past the expression to the actual condition of a person she had known since before they knew themselves. "I did the right thing," he said. "But it doesn't feel the way I thought it would." "No," his mother said. "It rarely does. The right thing mostly just feels like surviving something you weren't sure you were going to survive. The other feelings come later." Natalie put her hand in his. His cousins gathered around him. His oldest friends, men and women who had known him before the portfolio and the penthouse, who had known the one-room office and the borrowed truck, stood in a chapel in Lincoln Park with the particular loyalty of people who have shown up for the hard version of something. He was not alone. He had never been alone. He had simply, for 8 months, been managing the wrong relationships. 3 months later, Marcus invited Chase to dinner in Evanston. "My sister is in town from New York," he said. "I think you two should meet." Chase almost said no. He was rebuilding in the ways that mattered. Not the business. The business had never been in danger. The interior architecture. The capacity to be in a room with a person and receive what they were giving him without processing it primarily as a threat to be evaluated. It was slow work. It was the slowest work he had ever done. He was not ready. Something in the way Marcus said it made him say yes anyway. Kiara Webb was Marcus's younger sister by 4 years. She was a high school teacher who had recently finished the funding round for a Brooklyn nonprofit focused on STEM access for first-generation college students. She wore her hair natural and wore no performance alongside it, and her face in conversation had the quality of a face that is doing what faces are supposed to do, reflecting what was actually happening inside. When she laughed, she laughed. When she didn't, she didn't. She did not ask Chase what he was worth. She did not ask about the portfolio or the addresses. She asked whether he liked Chicago in winter, actually liked it, not just lived in it, and he said yes for reasons that had more to do with the light than the temperature, and she said she understood that, and they talked about light in cities for 20 minutes without either of them noticing how much time was passing. They talked for 4 hours. About her students. About the South Side he had grown up in, and the way it looked now compared to how it had looked then. About what it meant to build something from nothing, and whether the thing you built ever stopped feeling fragile. About what you did when the thing you believed turned out to have been designed to fail. She listened when he talked about Veronica. Not with the careful sympathy of someone managing their own discomfort, but with the simple directness of someone actually receiving difficult information. What you did, she said, took something I don't think most people have. To wait. To see it all the way through. To choose evidence over reaction.
I had help, Chase said.
She shook her head. Marcus helped. But the choice was yours every day for 40 days. At the end of the evening, he asked if she would have dinner with him.
Just the two of them.
He said it plainly, without the architecture of performance, because he was finished with performance. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that did not require observation to confirm its authenticity. I'd like that, she said. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Chase stood in a Cook County courtroom and watched. Veronica had taken a plea deal. 7 years, conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, reduced in exchange for testimony against Hollis and the 3 physicians. The Minneapolis investigation into Gerald Pratt's death had been reopened. Hennepin County had charges pending. Derek Hollis had not taken a deal. His trial was scheduled for fall. The 3 physicians had surrendered their licenses. The attorney had received a 10-year sentence the previous week. As they led Veronica from the courtroom, she looked back at Chase once, from across the room, with the expression of someone at the end of something they understand is completely over. Not asking for anything. Not performing. Just a person looking at the consequence of what they chose and understanding that it is exactly what they chose. He held her gaze without cruelty and without warmth. Just steadily. The way you look at something you have finally completely stopped needing to make sense of. Outside the courthouse, on the steps in the February cold, Kiara was waiting. She had taken the train from New York that morning. She had not called ahead to tell him she was coming. She had simply come because she understood that certain days required presence and that asking whether presence was needed was its own form of distance. He stood on the steps and she was there. "How do you feel?" she asked, her hand finding his in the cold. Chase thought about the question. He thought about 4 a.m. on the 4th day in the hospital and the ceiling becoming visible. He thought about the smile, that half-second flicker, and the grief of it. He thought about 40 days of moving through his own home as a stranger while watching love reveal itself as inventory. He thought about standing at an altar and removing his glasses and the silence that preceded the chapel coming apart. He thought about Eleanor Adler's arms around him and Natalie's hand in his, and the friends who had come from wherever they had come from because they were people who showed up. He thought about Kiara in Marcus's kitchen 4 months ago, laughing about something that was actually funny. "Like I can finally see clearly," he said. She looked at him. Not at his face the way he had learned to look at faces, cataloging, assessing, watching for the tell. Just at him. "Really?"
she said.
"Truly?" "Not just with my eyes," he said. "With everything." She leaned into him slightly, the specific lean of a person who has decided, without ceremony or announcement, that this is a place they intend to stay. He put his arm around her. Chicago was cold and bright around them. The lake somewhere beyond the buildings, the city doing what it did, continuous and indifferent and full of people building things from nothing, making bets on the future, sometimes losing and sometimes not. He held on. For months after the courthouse, he proposed. Not at a restaurant. Not in front of an audience assembled to make the moment feel larger than it was. In his mother's kitchen in South Shore, on a Sunday in November, with Eleanor making coffee at the counter and the smell of a meal that had been cooking since morning filling the small house, Chase got down on one knee on the linoleum floor and asked Kiara Webb a question he already knew the answer to. She said yes with the simplicity of a person for whom the answer had never been complicated. The wedding was large. Everyone came. Eleanor Adler cried through both readings and claimed afterward that she had not. Natalie gave a speech that made the room laugh and then fall quiet and then laugh again in the way of the best speeches. Marcus stood beside Chase at the altar with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for something to go right and is watching it go right and is allowing himself, carefully, to be glad. When Kiara came through the doors, the light was behind her in the way light sometimes is on days that matter, and Chase looked at her coming toward him and felt nothing that required management or analysis or performance. Just the plain, complete feeling of a person looking at the right thing. "I can see you," he said when she reached him. Quietly, just for her. "I can see you too," she said. And in the warmth of the room, with the people who loved them present and accounted for, and the winter light coming through the windows of the church on the south side of Chicago where Eleanor Adler had worshipped for 40 years, Chase Adler understood something he could only have learned the way he had learned it. Sometimes you had to lose the thing you thought you wanted to see the thing you actually needed. Sometimes the breaking was not the end of something, but the beginning of the version of yourself that was built to last. Sometimes the 40 days of pretending not to see were what it took to finally, completely, look at something real. He had pretended to be blind. And in the pretending, he had learned to see. He took her hands. He did not let go. You stayed until the end, and the end means something. Real love does not ask you to stop seeing clearly. It gives you something worth seeing. Follow Echoed Truth Stories and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the truth only echoes when someone is brave enough to pass it on.